My brother's BMW was parked in the spot where I'd learned to ride a bicycle. I stood in the driveway of my grandmother's house, keys still in my hand, staring at the gleaming black sedan that took up exactly the space where, 33 years ago, I'd fallen and scraped both knees and gotten back up anyway. He'd parked there deliberately. The guest spaces were empty, the street had room. But Brett had chosen this spot, the one directly in front of the porch steps, the place of honor, because he always did. I parked on the street and grabbed the gift bag from my passenger seat. Inside was a birthday card, nothing fancy, just something I'd picked up at the drugstore near Quantico. And inside that card, folded carefully, were 2 brass keys and a property deed that represented every dollar I'd saved over 25 years of military service. I was 44 years old, and I was about to ruin my grandmother's 90th birthday party. The front door was unlocked, the way it always was when family gathered. I could hear voices from the living room, my sister Latoria's laugh, high and performative, my aunt's lower murmur, Brett's voice cutting through with some story that had everyone's attention. I stood in the entryway for a moment, looking at the photos on the wall. Grandmother as a young woman in the 1950s. My grandfather in his army uniform from Korea. My parents on their wedding day. And then us. 3 grandchildren arranged by age and achievement. Brett at his medical school graduation. Latoria at her wedding, all white lace and professional photography. And me, a single snapshot from boot camp, hair shorn, face serious, the only military photo my grandmother had ever been able to display, because everything else I'd done was classified. "Alicia, you made it!" My grandmother appeared in the hallway, moving slowly but steadily with her cane. At 90, she was smaller than I remembered, her spine curved, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and old-fashioned face powder. "Wouldn't miss it, Gram. Let me look at you." She held me at arm's length. "Too thin. They're not feeding you enough." "Marines feed plenty. I just run it all off." She patted my cheek. "Always so serious, my Alicia. Come, everyone's in the living room." The living room was exactly as I remembered. Floral couch that had been reupholstered twice, my grandfather's recliner that no one else was allowed to sit in, the oak coffee table with water rings from decades of glasses. But today it was crowded. Brett sat in the recliner, of course, with his wife Casey perched on the arm. Latoria occupied half the couch with her twins playing at her feet. My aunt and uncle sat in the dining chairs someone had carried in. And in the center of the coffee table, a store-bought cake from the supermarket that said, "Happy 90th birthday" in blue icing. "Look who finally showed up," Brett said. He didn't stand. "Thought maybe you had to work." Took leave. Must be nice having that kind of flexibility. At the hospital, we can't just take off whenever we want. People's lives depend on us. Casey touched his shoulder, a gentle warning. Brett was a resident in emergency medicine, a fact he worked into conversation the way some people mention the weather. He'd introduced himself as Dr. Brett Kincaid at family gatherings since the day he'd passed his boards, despite still being 3 years from completing his residency. "Alessia," Latoria bounced up from the couch and wrapped me in a hug. "I was worried you weren't coming. You never RSVP'd to my Facebook event." "I don't check Facebook much." "Well, obviously." She stepped back, eyeing my outfit, khaki pants and a plain black sweater. "We're doing photos later. You brought something nicer to change into, right?" "This is what I brought." Her smile tightened. "Okay, well, we'll work with it." My grandmother settled into her designated chair, the one positioned to see both the television and the front window. "Now that we're all here, let's eat." Latoria brought a lovely spread. We arranged ourselves around the dining table, which my aunt had extended with both leaves to accommodate everyone. Latoria had indeed brought a spread, a honey-baked ham, 3 kinds of salad, dinner rolls from the expensive bakery downtown, a cheese board that looked like something from a magazine. My contribution was a bottle of wine that I'd grabbed at the same drugstore as the card. Over lunch, I listened to Brett talk about a surgery he'd observed, Latoria describe her twins, gifted program applications, and Casey detail the cruise she and Brett were planning for their anniversary. My aunt asked appropriate questions. My uncle nodded at appropriate intervals. My grandmother ate slowly and smiled, her attention moving from face to face like she was memorizing each one. No one asked me about work. They never did. It wasn't always this way. When I'd first enlisted, my family had been supportive in that vague, uncertain way people are when someone chooses a path they don't understand. My grandmother had worried I'd get hurt. Brett, still in pre-med, had asked if I was sure I didn't want to finish college first. Latoria had helped me pack, making jokes about how I'd have to learn to make my bed properly. But over the years, as Brett became a doctor, and Latoria became a wife and mother, and I became whatever I was in their minds, something shifted. My work was classified, I couldn't tell them about most of it. So they filled in the blanks themselves, and what they imagined was always less than what I actually did. The moment I knew exactly how they saw me came 3 years ago at Thanksgiving. Brett had drunk too much wine and gotten philosophical. "I admire you, Alicia," he had said, his words slightly slurred. "I really do. Not everyone has what it takes to be a career military. It's a steady paycheck, good benefits, doesn't require much, initiative. Some people need that structure, you know, and there's honor in it. In doing your part, even if it's just whatever it is you do." Latoria had tried to shush him, but the damage was done. Just whatever it is you do. As if my 22 years of service, the deployments I couldn't discuss, the operations I couldn't mention, the decisions I'd made that affected thousands of Marines, were equivalent to showing up and collecting a paycheck for some vague administrative function. I'd gone home that night and looked at the Colonel's eagles on my dress blues hanging in my closet and wondered why I'd worked so hard to earn them if the people who were supposed to know me best couldn't even fathom them. After lunch, we cleared the table and moved back to the living room for presents. My grandmother settled into her chair with the excitement of a child, and we arranged ourselves around her. Latoria had organized everything, naturally. A neat pile of wrapped gifts on the coffee table, cards in a separate stack, a legal pad to keep track of who gave what for thank you notes. "Should we do cards first?" Latoria asked, already reaching for the pile. "However you want to do it, dear." But Brett was already standing, holding a large envelope. "Actually, I think mine should go first. It's kind of special." Latoria's jaw tightened, but she smiled. "Of course." Brett handed the envelope to our grandmother with a flourish. "Happy birthday, Gram." She opened it carefully, the way she did everything, preserving the envelope. Inside was a brochure for an Alaskan cruise, all glossy photos of glaciers and whales and ship amenities. A booking confirmation slipped out. "A cruise to Alaska!" Grandmother's face lit up. "Brett, this is too much." "Nothing's too much for you. 2 weeks, all expenses paid. You've always wanted to see Alaska." "How generous!" My aunt clasped her hands together. "Oh, Mom, you're gonna love it." Latoria was already moving, refusing to be outdone. She produced her own carefully wrapped box. Mine next. Inside was a certificate for a spa day at some resort hotel. Massage, facial, lunch, the works. "Spa day for 2. Lovely," Grandmother said, and I could see Latoria's satisfaction at the adjective, at being lovely in comparison to Brett's generous. They continued trading presents. My uncle gave a framed family photo, professionally done with everyone in coordinated outfits, that I hadn't been present for. My aunt gave a subscription to a magazine about gardening. Casey gave an ornate jewelry box that probably cost more than she should have spent. And with each gift, there was a performance. The presentation, the unwrapping, the exclamations, the thank yous, the competition for who could show the most love through the most impressive token. I watched my grandmother's face and saw something I recognized from my own mirror. The careful management of expression, the genuine gratitude fighting with exhaustion, the weight of being the center of attention when all you wanted was something quieter, something real. Then Latoria reached for the cards. "Okay, these will go faster." She handed them to my grandmother one by one, a card from a cousin in Florida, one from an old church friend, one from my grandmother's sister in Arizona. Each one received the same treatment. Opened carefully, read aloud if there was a message, set aside with the envelope. Then she picked up mine. It was a drugstore card, the kind that came in a plastic sleeve on a rack. The front said, "Happy Birthday" in script font over a generic floral design. It cost $3.99. Next to the custom photo cards and the ones from expensive stationers, it looked exactly like what it was. An afterthought, purchased without care or consideration. A birthday card. Latoria's voice was carefully neutral. She handed it to my grandmother. "How nice." Grandmother opened it. I watched her read the printed message inside. Something generic about celebrating another year. She smiled, the polite smile you give to strangers. Then she moved to set it aside with the others. But she didn't open the card all the way, didn't see what I'd tucked inside, didn't read what I'd written. She just set it face down on the growing pile and reached for the next one, already moving on, already done with my contribution, and something in my chest cracked. This was the moment, the one I'd orchestrated, the one I'd planned, standing in my quarters 3 weeks ago, staring at property documents and thinking about every family gathering where I'd sat quietly while Brett preened and Latoria performed, and everyone agreed that they were the successful ones, the impressive ones, the ones who'd made something of themselves. But now, watching my grandmother set aside my card without seeing what was inside, I felt sick. My aunt picked up the card absently, already focused on the next gift. Oh, something fell out. She picked up the 2 brass keys from where they'd landed on the carpet. She opened the card all the way, the property deed unfolded, official, notarized, unmistakable. She read aloud, her voice confused, "The beach house is yours. Deed inside." The room stopped. My grandmother's hand flew to her mouth. "What beach house?" Brett leaned forward, and I saw his expression shift from confusion to something sharper. "Alicia, what is this?" I'd bought the house 8 months ago. It was in Carmel, California, a 3-bedroom cottage 2 blocks from the ocean. My grandmother had grown up in Monterey, had told me 1,000 times about the summers of her childhood, the sound of sea lions, the smell of salt air, the way the fog rolled in every evening like a blanket. After my grandfather died, she'd mentioned wanting to go back, just once, but the trip was expensive, and her arthritis made travel difficult, and there was always some reason it didn't happen. So I'd bought her a house there, emptied my savings, cashed in investments, used every connection I had to find something in her price range, which is to say, my price range, which was considerable after 25 years of military pay, combat bonuses, and living expenses covered by deployments. The mortgage was paid off, the utilities were set up, the place was furnished. All she had to do was say yes. "There's a house," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "In Carmel. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, garden in the back, 2 blocks from the beach. I bought it for you." "You bought?" Latoria's face was pale. "Alicia, houses in Carmel cost." "I know what they cost." "You can't afford." Brett stopped, recalculating. "What do you make as a, what's your rank?" "Colonel." The word dropped into silence. "Colonel," my aunt repeated. "Full bird, 06. Have been for 6 years." My grandmother was staring at the deed in my aunt's hands like it might disappear. "Alicia, this is too much." "It's not." My throat was tight. "Gram, you raised me when Mom and Dad died. You worked 2 jobs to keep Brett in college and Latoria in dance classes, and me in the house instead of foster care. You never took a vacation, never bought anything for yourself. Never asked for anything, so I'm asking you, please, take the house." "I don't understand." Latoria was looking at me like I was a stranger. "You're a colonel? Since when?" "Since I was 38. "And you never told us?" "You never asked." Brett stood up, pacing. "Okay, let's break this down. Colonels make what, maybe $80,000 a year? How did you?" "Base pay is $117. Plus housing allowance, hazard pay, combat pay, and investment returns on 25 years of mostly saving because I spent half my career deployed with nothing to spend money on. plus bonuses for re-enlistment and specialized skills. I looked at him steadily. I make more than you do, Brett. Significantly more. His face flushed. This isn't about money. Isn't it? The words came out sharper than I intended. Because that's what this has been about for years. You with your fancy degree and your hospital position. Latoria with her perfect family and her perfect house. Both of you looking at me like I'm some kind of charity case who needs $20,000 for a trust fund because I couldn't possibly have planned for my own future. We were trying to help, Latoria said softly. I didn't need help, I needed you to see me. Grandmother set down the card and stood, slower than she had earlier. She crossed to where I sat and took my face in both hands. Show me. What? Your uniform. You have pictures? I pulled out my phone, found the photo from my promotion ceremony. Me in dress blues, eagles on my shoulders, rows of ribbons on my chest, shaking hands with a 2-star general. I handed it to her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she handed it to my aunt, who passed it to Brett, who stared at it like it was written in a language he didn't speak. That's you, my grandmother said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. All this time. Yes, ma'am. She pulled me into a hug and I felt her trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was tired, I said into her shoulder. Tired of proving myself. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of watching everyone assume I was less than I was, because I couldn't talk about what I did. And then I was angry, and then I was petty, and then I pulled back. And then I planned this. Bought you a house and put the keys in a cheap card and waited for exactly this moment, where I could watch everyone realize they'd been wrong about me. And now I feel like an asshole because you're 90 years old and I just weaponized your birthday party. The room was silent. Then, my grandmother laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle she'd been giving all afternoon. Oh, honey, you've been carrying this around for how long? 3 years. Since Thanksgiving. Whatever it is you do comment, Brett said quietly. God, Alicia, I was drunk. I didn't mean. You did mean it. You all did. You think I'm less than you because I chose a different path. Because I can't talk about my work at dinner parties. Because I show up in khakis and a sweater instead of designer labels. Because I'm not a doctor or a mother or whatever you decided success looks like. Latoria was crying now, mascara running. You're right. We did think that. I thought you needed our help, our guidance. She wiped her eyes, I thought I was better than you. We all did, my aunt said quietly, and that says more about us than it does about you. I looked around the room at my family, at their shocked faces, their obvious recalculation, their dawning understanding. This was what I'd wanted. The moment of revelation, the satisfaction of being seen, the vindication of proving them all wrong. Instead, I felt hollow. I shouldn't have done this, I said. I shouldn't have made Graham's birthday about my revenge fantasy. I should have just told you years ago. Should have shown you who I was instead of hiding and resenting you for not seeing through the hiding. My grandmother sat back down, still holding the deed. The house is real? Yes. And you want me to have it? More than anything. She looked at the deed, then at me, on one condition. Anything. You visit, not in your uniform, not as Colonel Kincaid, just as my Alicia, and you let us try again, all of us. She looked around the room. We failed you. We made assumptions. We elevated ourselves by diminishing you, and I think we all need to be better than that. Brett sat down heavily on the couch. I'm sorry, Alicia, I'm so sorry. The things I said, I was jealous. Of what? Your freedom, your independence. You could just leave, deploy somewhere, start over. You didn't have debt from medical school hanging over your head, or expectations crushing you, or everyone watching to see if you'd fail. You had this whole life I didn't understand, and instead of asking about it, I decided it must not be worth understanding. He looked at his hands. That's ugly to admit. Latoria nodded. I did the same thing, made myself feel better about giving up my career by deciding yours wasn't really a career at all. Just something you did until you figured out what you really wanted. and I've been waiting 10 years for you to figure it out, and you had it figured out the whole time." "I wasn't any better," I said. "I let you think what you wanted to think because it gave me an excuse to feel superior. I could be secretly better than you while playing the role of the family disappointment. That's not exactly healthy." "No," my grandmother said, "it's not. But we're admitting it now, and that's where change starts." We sat in silence for a moment. One of Latoria's twins came over and climbed into my lap, apparently bored with the adult drama. I held him, this nephew I barely knew, and felt the weight of all the family gatherings I'd attended while maintaining my distance, all the opportunities for connection I'd avoided because I was too busy being hurt. "The house has 3 bedrooms," I said. "If you want it, Graham, there's room for guests. Maybe we could take turns visiting, make it a family place." "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." Brett stood up. "Okay, let me say something, and don't interrupt. Alicia, you're a colonel in the Marine Corps. That's incredible. I'm proud of you. I should have been proud of you all along, should have asked questions and listened to answers and tried to understand. I didn't. I was small and jealous and dismissive. I want to be better." Latoria wiped her eyes. "Me too. I want to know about your work, the parts you can share. I want to know who you are, not who I decided you were." "And I need to let you," I said. "I need to stop hiding and testing and waiting for you to fail so I can feel vindicated. I need to just be honest about all of it." My aunt picked up the photo from my phone again. "Look at all those ribbons. What are they for?" "That one's from Afghanistan. That one's from a peacekeeping mission in Africa. That one's classified. That one's for— actually, most of them are classified." "Can you tell us anything?" my uncle asked. "Even just what a colonel does." So I told them. Not the classified parts, not the operations or the intelligence, but the daily reality of command, the responsibility for hundreds of Marines, the logistics of keeping a battalion running, the weight of sending people into danger, the pride of seeing them succeed, the grief of losing them when success wasn't enough. They listened, really listened, asked questions, tried to understand. And slowly, as the afternoon stretched into evening, something shifted. We weren't a perfect family. We probably never would be. Too much had been said, too much assumed, too much hurt accumulated over years. But we were trying, and trying felt like more than we'd managed in a long time. Eventually, the twins got hungry and cranky. Casey needed to get home. My uncle had an early morning. The party wound down the way family parties do, with hugs and promises and plans for next time. I stayed to help my grandmother clean up. We worked in silence for a while, washing plates and putting away leftovers. Finally, she spoke. "The house, tell me about it." So I pulled up photos on my phone, showed her the front porch with its weathered wood, the living room with windows facing west toward the ocean, the garden that needed work but had good bones, the neighborhood, quiet and old, the kind of place where people knew each other's names. "It's perfect," she said quietly. "Thank you. I'm sorry I made your birthday about my issues. Honey, I'm 90 years old. I've had 89 other birthdays that were perfectly pleasant and entirely forgettable. This one I'll remember." She dried her hands and turned to face me. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Stop hiding from all of us, including yourself. You've earned your rank, you've built an impressive career, you've done things that matter. Stop treating it like a secret shame because your family didn't understand it. Make us understand. Or if we can't, at least make us see that our lack of understanding doesn't diminish what you've accomplished. That's a tall order, Graham. You're a colonel. Tall orders are your specialty." I hugged her again, longer this time. "I'll try. That's all any of us can do." I drove home that night through darkness, the property deed now back in my possession with my grandmother's signature on the transfer documents. She'd cried when she signed them, happy tears, grateful tears, but also tears for all the years we'd been polite strangers playing at being family. My phone buzzed with texts throughout the drive, Brett apologizing again, more elaborately, Latoria sharing photos from the party, including several of me that I'd never seen taken. My aunt asking if we could have lunch sometime, just the two of us. And one from my grandmother. Thank you for the house, but more than that, thank you for finally letting us see you. It's worth waiting 90 years for. I pulled over at a rest stop and sat in my car, reading that message over and over. The parking lot was empty except for a couple of trucks, their drivers sleeping in their cabs. Overhead, stars I couldn't name filled the sky with cold light. I'd gotten what I wanted. The reveal, the recognition, the satisfaction of watching my family recalculate everything they'd assumed about me. But what I'd gotten that I hadn't expected was the realization that I'd needed recalculation too. That my resentment had been its own kind of judgment. That hiding had been its own kind of arrogance, as if their failure to see me was more important than my refusal to be seen. We'd all failed each other, and now we had to decide if we wanted to do better. I started the car and pulled back onto the highway. Ahead of me, hours of driving. Behind me, a family that was imperfect and complicated, and finally, tentatively, honestly trying. It would